First of all, I am so excited that this year when it said SREcon San Francisco, it didn't mean SREcon Santa Clara. Terrible bait and switch. Yes, San Francisco Hyatt, woo! So you might have noticed this is not the talk that is on the agenda. We did a little switcheroo last night. I will be giving the talk about how security and compliance regimes are not incompatible with modern development best practices later today at like 2-ish. Today, instead, we're going to talk about my favorite topic, observability. Is it already time to version observability? Signs point to yes. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I won't repeat it other than to point out that my co-author, Liz Fong-Jones, is right there. If you have any questions about observability, ask her. What does observability mean? And here's where I take a long and painful sigh. Maybe it means the control theory thing. Maybe it means monitoring is about known unknowns, observability is about unknown unknowns. Maybe it's Peter Borgen's thing about there's 3 pillars. Maybe it's about high cardinality, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's about monitoring, Austin Parker, monitoring is the monitor telling me my baby is crying, but observability is telling me why. Kind of like that one. And lest you have thought that we were done coming up with new definitions for observability, Hazel Weekly came up with another one 3 days ago, which is this. Arguing about definitions is everyone's favorite thing, isn't it? If the job of technical language is to help us clarify our thinking and make better decisions, differentiate our choices, then the term observability is clearly failing because it gets used for anything and everything. And if you kind of like look at this over a chronological history of observability, we started Honeycomb in 2016. We were trying to figure out how to talk about because Christine and I had this semi-religious experience of like being just totally screwed down in the trenches and being saved by software that was completely different. And we're like, well, how do we talk about it? We read the definition for control theory that it's about how you can understand your systems by observing the outputs. And we were like, ooh, light bulb. So we worked on this for a few years. We came up with a long laundry list of things, followed by what I now think of as my well actually years, when all I seemed to do was go around telling people on Twitter that they were using the word wrong. I'm so embarrassed by that. The 3 pillars thing really seemed to kick in when all of the big vendors with very deep pockets got involved. Observability is a generic synonym for telemetry. We got a category, and at this point it's like, ugh, who even cares? I want to propose one last definition, which is that observability is a property of complex systems, just like reliability, just like performance. It describes the system, not the tools. And these are sociotechnical systems, so you could improve your observability just by adding metrics if you didn't have any. You might improve your observability by sharing a cool trick with your friend who you work with. In some cases, you might improve your observability by adding dashboards. In other scary systems, you might improve your observability by deleting a bunch of dashboards. This definition feels both useful and true to me. And I'm totally behind it. But there's just one problem with the sort of big tent definition of observability, which is that not all observability tooling is created equal. And whereas systems may exist along a continuum, evidence suggests that tools do not. In fact, I think there has recently been kind of a generational sea change in data types, in workflows, in usability, in mental models. What we have experienced, what users consistently report, and not just Honeycomb users, like ex-Facebook users who have used Scuba, they report consistently a sort of massive discontinuous leap in value. And in the parlance of semantic versioning, since it is a breaking backwards incompatible change, I think that means it's time to bump the major version number. I'm actually really kind of excited about this framing because I think it allows us to capture so much more about the transformations that are at stake than just the technical capabilities and checklists about the tools that are involved. So like, let's describe the world of Observability 1.0. It's based on metrics, logs, and traces. Most tools are built on top of metrics. Your APMs, your RUMs are all built on top of metrics. So you have many sources of truth. They might have a few predefined small links between them, but they're fundamentally, an event comes in and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, however many tools you pay for. You have many tools, probably. Your main interface for debugging with these is static dashboards. You debug based on scar tissue, intuition, and don't get me wrong, I was always this person, and I loved being this person who's like, just surveys the wall of dashboards and is like, it's Redis. Like, I know it doesn't say it's Redis anywhere there, but I know it is. And I'm right, and I feel like God, right? It's amazing. But that's what you do. You do it because you have to, because it's not actually in the tool, but because you've been through so many outages before. Yeah, alerting, you tend to page on symptoms, and cost, of course, you're paying to store your data many times. For Observability 2.0, there's a single source of truth. There's just one. You capture arbitrarily wide structured data blobs, call them events or spans or structured logs. You can handle high cardinality, high dimensionality. Your interface is exploratory, interactive. There's no dead ends. You can go all the way from SLOs, slice and dice and explore, all the way down to individual requests and how they're different from each other. Debugging looks like following the trail of breadcrumbs. It's in the data. You don't have to know what you're looking for before you go find it. Alerts, you're definitely aligned with your customer pain using SLOs. Usually this means you have gotten to delete at least 95% of your paging alerts. And the cost, of course, is you pay to store it once. Some of you may be familiar with this painful laundry list that I used to talk about constantly. I'm so sorry. One of the worst things about this laundry list is nobody's ever really sure if it applied to them or not. Am I doing observability? Am I not? Is my tool an observability tool? I've got 3 out of 8. Is it observability? Is it not? Fortunately, with this framing of 1.0 versus 2.0, I think it's actually really simple. If you have 3 pillars and many tools, you're in 1.0 land. If you have a single source of truth, you're in 2.0 land. Now, there is a lot that sort of emanates out of this very basic starting point. And it's not quite as simple as I'm making it sound, but it starts that simple. Let's start with, and by the way, this is why I didn't want to follow Corey Quinn. It's just like, so funny, and now I'm just like, let's talk about data structures. Next time, I insist on going before Corey. Let's talk about data structures. To reap the full rewards of Observability 2.0, though, it's not, you can't just buy a tool and it's done, right? It's like CI/CD. You can't just like buy a tool, I have achieved continuous delivery, Like, it doesn't work that way. The software that you buy or build or adapt or use paves the way for you to build the sociotechnical capabilities. How the data gets stored, again. In 1.0, tracing is yet another siloed tool. In Observability 2.0, tracing is just a different visualization. You're just visualizing the same events across time. Observability 1.0 relies heavily on write-time aggregation, and Observability 2.0 stores the raw events indefinitely and does read-time aggregation, which gives you a lot more flexibility. And this is why we say that metrics-based tools are good for known unknowns, for systems that tend to fail in repeatable ways. Because every single custom metric that you want to someday be able to put in a dashboard, you have to predict it in advance and gather it. If you want to gather a metric for Android devices hitting this endpoint, blah, 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 you have to do that. You can't just like capture like all device types, all endpoints, all build IDs, all whatever, and then just like slice and dice, which is what you would want if you have systems that are, failing very unpredictably, and therefore you need to be able to handle unknown unknowns. Who uses it and how? Observability 1.0 is very much about reliability, operations. It's about MTTR, MTTD. It's often like part of a checklist because you're like, doing your Jira tickets or whatever people do with Jira tickets. How do I monitor this? How am I going to know if my code is up? It's very much an ops concern, but Observability 2.0 is not. It's about how you develop your code. It's what underpins the entire software development process, the life cycle. It's what allows you to connect these really tight feedback loops. We talk about testing and production, but we're also like developing and test, right? They all start to smear together because if you can hook up these tight feedback loop, it's like, I feel like the last generation of engineers, their revelation was TDD. Like, yes, tests are great. Write your tests. No person say that I'm not saying to write tests. But TDD, like tests stop at the border of your laptop, right? They're just like, you're basically saying, okay, my code is probably logically coherent. It's not actually factoring into account reality. You don't know if your code works or not until you've watched your code work in production as users are using it. And then it probably works for, for this set of circumstances, right? If you want to know anything about how your code actually performs, you need to include production systems, which is why I feel like observability-driven development is if you really want to ship quickly and with confidence, is where your focus needs to be, where you're instrumenting your code as you go, you ship it to production, and then you look at it through the lens of the instrumentation you just wrote, and you're asking yourself, is it doing what I expect it to do, and does anything else look weird? And like, the cost of finding and fixing bugs goes up exponentially from the moment that you write them, right? You type a bug, you backspace, good for you, right? You catch it in your tests, good for you. The next time that you are likely to be able to catch that is right after you've deployed it to prod, while you still have all that context in your head. You know what you tried to build, you know how you did it, you know what you tried that didn't work, you know what you named the things, you know what the variables are named, you know what the functions are named, you know all this stuff. And this is the moment in time when you should take advantage of that and look at it in production, because you're never going to get that back. It's going to decay in what, an hour or two? It's not going to survive you paging in and out another project. The UI, the design aspects are super important here too, because you could have the best, most flexible, high cardinality supporting storage engine in the world. It doesn't really matter if you don't actually have an interface that lets you explore. I think I can tell this anecdote. Yeah, this seems fine. So Christine and I actually almost didn't start Honeycomb because we looked at New Relic at the time. We're just like, they have everything they need. But they did stuff like, they'd had this high cardinality dimension, and it would be in a drop down for something with like 1 million different values. And you're just like, this doesn't work. The interface has to support that. Observability 1.0 is about operations. Observability 2.0 is very much about development. And slight twist on this is that 1.0 is often, we often talk about observability and we start thinking about it like it's all about bugs and errors and finding problems. And yes, it is that, but it's not just that. Like Observability 2.0 is just about understanding your code. There are lots of reasons for wanting to understand that which you have just birthed into the world that do not include it's broken. Like maybe you're trying to figure out if your users are using it in the way that you want them to. Maybe you're trying to figure out what to do next. Maybe you're just like, curious. I feel like so many of us are used to tools that punish us for our curiosity. And I think it's a really key aspect of Observability 2.0 that it not do that. How you interact with production. There's a lot of behavioral shift that goes on here that I think is going to be really interesting to watch us process over the next couple of years. Because with Observability 1.0, we all kind of got into this habit where you would deploy your code, or not even that, you would merge your code and walk away and wait to get paged. And just well, the system will let me know if I need to go look at it. My job is done, right? I committed, my test pass. So there's a trade-off here, right? If you're relying on your systems to nag you about every little thing, then maybe you can do that. But the whole goal of this is align engineering pain with user pain. So we don't get paged all the time. This means that most of the bugs and problems that we ship will never actually rise to the level of paging you, which is great. But they're still there. So in exchange for not getting paged all the time, the trade-off is, okay, but you go and you affirmatively look. You give a shit, right? You go and you look. You see, what is it doing, this thing that I've just put out into the universe? Is it good? Is it good enough? I think that trade-off is worth it. A phrase that we've heard a lot of times is that it feels like you're in constant conversation with your code. The barrier between, I feel like and I blame us at Ops for this, for a lot of it, just we're so, get your hands off my production systems, I understand why we did that, because our systems were really, really fragile. And it shouldn't be like that anymore, right? We should be able to welcome people in and make it more of a playground with guardrails. It's safe here. You can fail in some limited ways, and it's not going to destroy the universe. How you debug in Observability 1.0 land? A lot of this is scanning with your eyeballs, just here's a spike, and you just start flipping through or scrolling, just looking for other things that look like that. Because the deadly little secret of metrics is that you discarded all of the context when you wrote it out to disk. Gone. You could never get it back. So you have no way, you have no chance of actually verifying that this metric correlates with that metric. All you can do is say, well, they seem to be the same shape, and what are the chances? That's terrible, right? But it's what we've done all of our lives, which is why we lean so heavily on intuition, past experience, and a rich mental model of the system. This is also why in Observability 1.0 lands, the best debuggers are always the ones who have been there the longest, because they've been exposed to the most outages, because you have no hope of debugging these systems unless you have a lot of that information up here, because it sure as hell isn't in your tool. In Observability 2.0, it shouldn't be like that. The connections, the context, that sort of connective tissue, so that if this metric is like this for this request, you should be able to see what were all the other metrics like for that request. That seems super important, especially if you're trying to correlate and go, oh, this outlier, this thing that I care about. So much of debugging comes down to, here's the thing I care about. What are all the ways that it's different from things that I don't care about, right? Well, you can't answer that question for yourself if you discarded all of the context. The beautiful thing about Observability 2.0 is that the best debuggers are not the people who have been there the longest. They're the people who are the most curious. They're the people who give a shit, who open up the tool and look at their code after they deployed it to see what hell they have, what glorious, wonderful software they have put out into the world. It's also, in 1.0 land, it's very search first. And this is something that we've been thinking a lot about lately, because I feel like this debugging workflow is so ingrained of us. Here's the thing I care about. Now I'm going to go search for it. And I'm going to scroll up, I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to see how many times it occurs. But what if you don't know what to search for? The cost model. So I'm not going to go super deep into this because I just wrote a blog post about this a couple of weeks ago, and if you're interested, I talk about it a lot more there. But there's a lot of angst out in the world right now about the cost crisis in observability tooling, and I understand why. I think it's justified, and I don't actually think it's entirely about the sticker shock. I mean, it costs a lot. But I don't think that's the problem so much as I think that people are beginning to correctly intuit that the value they get from these tools have become radically disconnected from the prices that they are paying. And in fact, in a lot of cases, as your bill goes up, the value that you get out actually goes down. Like your experience degrades, your ability to find things degrade, things get slower, the amount of engineering time it takes to sort of like curate and like, you know, and it's very opaque, right? If you have a metrics-based cost model, I put in my blog post that you sometimes get, you know, like a $30,000 metric in a month. And right after that, my friend was like, I wish it was $30,000 a month. He's like, last weekend, we rolled out a couple of metrics on Friday and came back on Monday, and each of them had cost us tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, that happens. Happens, and it's really hard to prevent. You just have to be very vigilant. The cost goes up at best linearly. In metrics-based systems, the cost increase is driven by the custom metrics. Now, obviously, like you install a new tool, you set it up, it gives you a whole bunch of like built-in metrics, but those are garbage. The only thing that really matters is the custom metrics that you define. And so at best, your cost is going to go up linearly, which means that you're constantly going to be going, ugh, is this one still important enough to keep? Maybe I can delete it. Oops, that was the wrong one to delete. And at best linearly because, again, the cost for individual metrics can spike massively. And when it comes to logs, I'll deal with logs in a minute. With 2.0, again, you pay to store your data once. I'm not going to claim it's cheap. Having good telemetry and a lot of retention is never cheap. But I will claim that as your bill goes up, the value goes up with it. And you have way more powerful surgical options for controlling costs. One of the problems with the cost model 1.0 is that for logs, because logs tend to be so spammy, you tend to take very blunt instruments to trying to slash them. So you use like consistent hashes or log levels, you guys. And it's just like, ooh, okay, well, a third of it's gone. Instead of using something like head-based sampling or tail-based sampling or dynamic sampling, where you're like, okay, keep 100% of every request that goes to /payment, /billing, keep every 5OX, every 4OX, sample health checks, keep 1 out of every 10, keep 1 out of every 5, 200s to the root domain. You can get a lot more precise with that. Yeah. Oh, and the other beautiful thing is about 2.0 is that it is effectively free to toss more dimensions into your white events. So every one of your custom metrics that your cost is going up linearly, you can take every one of them and just toss them into your white events and pay nothing for effectively infinite custom metrics. It's pretty dope. There are 3 types of data under the hood. I'll be super brief about this because I believe this is all well-trodden territory for y'all. Metrics are the great granddaddy of telemetry formats. They're tiny, fast, and cheap. A metric consists of a single number, often with some tags appended. All the context, again, gets discarded at write time, which means you can never correlate. It's a fatal flaw. Most tools out there that we're familiar with are based on metrics, APM tools, RUM, etc. And nobody can understand their systems with just metrics-based tools because they are so limited. in what they can do. No context, no high cardinality, no data structures, no ability to dig down or slice and dice or dive down, dive up, only basic static dashboards. If it sounds like I am a metrics bigot, it's because I probably am. I did put the cute little pink sticker on my thing, the metrics, smiley face, or whatever it said. I don't hate metrics, I just hate what they're used for. To understand our systems, we turn to logs. Even unstructured logs are more powerful than metrics because they preserve some of the precious context. And the main problems are you kind of need to know what you're looking for and able to find it. And the only thing you can do with unstructured logs is string searches, which is so slow. Like the 1.0 world, it consists of metrics and logs. 8 years ago, it was almost entirely unstructured logs. I really do feel like that has finally changed. Almost every place seems to be using structured logs now, or they're too embarrassed to say otherwise. Raise your hand if you're just kidding. Just kidding. But like the combination of metrics, you can do math on them, right? And tags or logs, which you can search on. It's like this unwieldy, you can't treat it like data. It's like you're on the command line and all you can do is pipe together grep and BC. Just like search math, search math, search math. Oops, can't search that math, can't math that church. We have learned to get so clever when it comes to wringing utility out of our metrics tools. I am genuinely, like the metrics tools that exist now are, I believe, the best that can be done. Like this is a 40, 50-year-old technology. I believe we have done what we can do with the metric. I thank it for its service. But what if we didn't have to work that hard? What if it was just data? This is why, when we're talking about getting from Ollie 1 to Ollie 2, structured logs are that bridge. They are the bridge from the past to the future. Invest your effort and your energy there. Metrics go to the past. They aren't completely useless. They still have their place in infrastructure mostly. But what? So like think about the amount of code that you're responsible for. There's your code, your crown jewels, the stuff that you're like legally and ethically responsible for. And then there's the infrastructure code, the code that you have to run in order to get to the code that you want to run. And infrastructure code, metrics are the right tool for that because you want to genuinely aggregate the telemetry around the perspective of the disk or CPU or the memory or the whatever. For your code, you don't want to do that. You only want to aggregate these statistics and telemetry around the experience of every single user as they use your software. That's where the metrics thing lies. And it used to be that we had to use metrics because storage was so incredibly expensive, right? We did all of these things for very good reasons. They got us here, but they're not going to get us where we need to go. So what you can do now to start moving towards Observability 2.0, I made the metrics god angered. Anyway, the first and biggest thing is start instrumenting your code according to the principles of canonical logs. It is hard to overstate how much magic and power this brings to your life. Instead of having to like pre-process or post-process logs to try and get, because logs tend to just like get emitted at random throughout, thank you. The request is executing and logs just go pew, 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 pew. And you're like, if I want to do anything useful with these, I then have to like reconstitute them into one blob, right? So don't do that. Like when the request enters a service, initialize a nice empty log, pre-populate it with anything you know about the parameters, the environment, the language internals, the whatever. As it's executing through your service, put any kind of custom metric thing or, app ID, user ID, shopping cart ID, anything that might be someday interesting for you when debugging. And then when the request is ready to exit or error, you ship it off in one wide event. And this will make your debugging lives transform as wide as possible. The wider they are, the richer they are, the more powerful you become. Add trace IDs and span IDs so that you can trace your code using the same exact events instead of having to hop between tools. One of the most frustrating things about Observability 1.0 world is that you've got the poor engineer here sitting in the middle. You've got your metrics and your dashboards. You've got your SLOs. Then you've got your logs. And then you've got your APM. And then you've got your tracing. And then you've got your profiling. And then you've got your, and nothing connects them except you sitting in the middle just going, well, there's a spike there. This is the same timestamp in my logging tool, so chances are good, right? And then maybe copy pasting an ID over to the tracing tool, and ooh, I hope we got this one. It's bullshit. It's bonkers. It's bonkers that we do that. What if you could just visualize the same thing? I don't know. It's so simple. Like, the way we're doing it now is so hard. It's so hard. It does not have to be this hard. Feed your data into a columnar store, move away from predefined schemas or indexes. Anything that you're doing up front to be like, this is the data that I am sure I am going to get, is not going to serve you well in a 2.0 world, because it's all about unknown unknowns. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to die. You don't know what's going to be in the top 10 list. What's the something house? ClickHouse? Yes, ClickHouse. It's great. Use it. Use a storage engine that supports high cardinality. This is another thing that we have gotten so used to, just like trying to debug with your hands tied behind your back and like one eye closed and like loud music blaring. Being able to just be like, I'm going to break down by 1 in a million app IDs, and then I'm going to break down by or group by normalized query or raw query or whatever. Just being able to follow a trail of breadcrumbs to the answer every time. It's magic. It's amazing. And adopt tools with explorable interfaces, or at least dynamic dashboards. It's so much easier, y'all. The thing that I hear the most from people are just like, oh, I don't know if we're ready for that. Because they have this impression that it's harder or more advanced. It's not. It's so dead simple. It's like, what makes it hard is for people like you and me who have been twisting our heads trying to make the questions we want to ask fit into something you can do with metrics and strings for the past decade or two. Kids out of school are just like, oh, obviously this is how it should work. You do not have to go through 1.0 and push it to its limits before adopting 2.0. There's no such thing as we're not ready for 2.0. It's like saying, we're not ready for modern MySQL. We're going to start with 4.11. It's good enough for my grandma. It's good enough for me. Our complexity, the need for this is not, it's not anything I'm saying, it's not vendors, it's not even cost. This is being driven by the complexity of our systems. Our tools were designed for predictable worlds where your systems failed in pretty much the same ways over and over, because most of the complexity was bound up inside your monolith. But then we blew up the monolith and we're like, let's just hop the network. Let's have third-party providers. Let's have platforms and APIs. And now, like, how many of you can actually draw your architecture map offhand without referring to anything? Is anyone going to lie? We used to be able to hold that in our heads and reason about it and make really good guesses about what was going wrong. Increasingly, this just doesn't work. And if it still works for you, great. I'm willing to bet it won't forever. So observability for software engineers is really just, can you understand your code just by observing its outputs and without having to ship new code to understand the code you're trying to understand, because that's a whole Catch-22 thing. We build better systems when we build software these days, and you become a better engineer by building software this way. Right now, like, when you're trying to put software engineers on call, and the ones who are just like, oh, I will quit. Like, I get it, because so many of us right now, I've said this before, but so many of us are working on systems that are just like something that the cat coughed up. It's like this hairball of a system. We're shipping code we don't understand every day to systems we've never understood, and then we wonder why it's a mess and nobody wants to be on call for them. That is not inevitable, and it's not necessary. It's hard work and can be a little bit painful to untangle it, but like the rewards are there, right? It can be better. Like, and it needs to be better. Like, I feel like something we haven't quite come to grips with is that the next generation of systems can't be built by burnt out people. Like, there was a time where we could power through because a lot of the work we had to do was on autopilot. And so we could be like exhausted or working 20-hour days and like sleeping under our desks and all. But like the level of complexity that we're dealing with, the stuff that can be done on autopilot is being automated out of existence. You need to be well rested. You need to have your creativity spark. You need to be emotionally invested in your work. We can't just hold a model of the system in our heads and guess about it. The teams that try will be outcompeted. Observability 2.0 is really, it is not sufficient, but it is necessary to advance the craft of software engineering. There are so many other awesome things, I'll talk about some of them in my talk later today, that we're doing to like decouple releases from deploys using feature flags and test in production safely. And almost all of them depend on us having a better set of observability tools than most of us have today. It's actually really scary to me to think of like, using feature flags. If you can't break down by build ID and feature flag and compare exactly what is happening when you turn this feature flag on for those requests versus those requests, like, that's kind of the point of feature flags, right? Like, if you're just looking at aggregates or 90th percentiles, 99th percentiles, that feels like driving in the dark. I was on a panel last week in closing and with the amazing Amy Toby, and someone asked us, what is the biggest obstacle that's standing between us and like this brave new world of observability? And I was like, people don't believe it's real. People don't believe that it can be better. We're also justifiably cynical, tired of vendors like me being like, it'll change your life, which I get. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to try it. Because if there's one thing that I've seen over and over, it's that engineers who have tried building with Observability 2.0 style tools, you cannot pry it out of their cold dead hands. Like, they will not go back. And I want that for you. We are entering a world where there is no dev versus ops, right? Everyone writes code. Everyone owns the code that we write. I feel like, what is it we all want out of our lives, out of work, right? It's autonomy and mastery and meaning. All of these things are so capable of like connecting us in a deep level with the meaning of what we're doing in the world. But like, I feel like being able to see it is really kind of a necessary component of that. So, in conclusion, are we too busy to improve? Thanks.